Halloween by DJ Herda, a first book. I'll go to chapter one real quick. It says ghosts, goblins, and witches, warlocks, fairies, and demons. There is no other holiday quite like Halloween. It's a peculiar mix of pagan customs, religious traditions, and frightening superstitions. The earliest Halloween celebration took place among the Celts, who lived more than 2,000 years ago in what is now England, Ireland, and Scotland, Wales, and northern France. The Celtic order of Druids, priests, used to honor Samhain, the Lord of the Dead. Samhain, the Lord of the Dead. On the evening of October 31st and the day of November 1st, according to ancient Celtic legend, Samhain could control the spirits of the dead. He could allow them to rest peacefully or spur them into wild and frenzied activity. Samhain assembled the souls of all those who had died during the previous year. This was the vigil of Samhain. To pay for their sins, these souls were put into the bodies of animals. The greater a person sins, the lower the animal into which his or her soul was placed. All sorts of goblins, spirits, and fairies were thought to roam the earth during the vigil of Samhain. In addition to worshiping Samhain, the Celts also worshipped their own sun god. They believed that the sun, as the ripener of grain, was their greatest friend. Without the sun, there would be no food and the people would starve. So once the summer's harvest was safely stored, the Celts tried to help strengthen the sun god for come in battle with the darkness and cold of winter. To do this, they offered animal sacrifices to the sun on November 1st, the Celtic New Year. In nearby Rome, a festival honoring the goddess Pomona was also held around November 1st. Pomona was the mistress of fruits and gardens. The Romans pictured Pomona as a beautiful young maiden, her arms filled with fruit and a crown of apples on her head. To thank Pomona for good harvest, the Romans laid out apples and nuts in her honor. Then they played various games, held races, and celebrated throughout the day and night. When the Romans conquered the Gauls, a Celtic people in what is now France, they brought their customs with them. Soon the Roman festival honoring Pomona and the Celtic vigil of Samhain were both held at the time we now celebrate Halloween. The result was a great fall holiday that mixed customs from two cultures. Later, during the Middle Ages, witchcraft emerged as an organized cult opposed to the Roman Catholic Church. Halloween became known as the Night of the Witch. It was then, according to superstition, that the devil and all his followers, witches, warlocks, male witches, and demons gathered. They would mock the coming of the church festival of All Saints' Day on November 1st by performing unholy acts. In Germany, these demons supposedly met at a mountain called the Brocken. In Sweden, they assembled at the Blocksberg. In France, they revealed in the forest of Ardennes. In England, any old church, ruined abbey, or monument served as their meeting place. The church had earlier established November 1st as All Saints or All Hallows Day. On that day, the saints who had no church holiday of their own were honored. As with many church holidays, November 1st was chosen because it was already the date of a pagan celebration. The church leaders hoped that by making November 1st a religious ceremony, the pagan rituals that had survived over the centuries would be forgotten. As much as the early church leaders wished the pagan rituals of Pomona Day and the vigil of Samhain would disappear, they did not. People around the world continued pagan celebrations on the evening before All Hallows. It became known as All Hallows Even. While All Hallows was a day for religious thought and church services, All Hallows Even was a night for magic and superstition. As time went on, the name of All Hallows Even was shortened to Halloween. Then it became Halloween. Halloween combined many of the religious customs from All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, celebrated on November 2nd, in memory of the dead, and the pagan customs of Pomona Day and the vigil of Samhain. From All Saints and All Souls' Day came the traditional honoring of the dead and their spirits. From Pomona Day came apples, nuts, and other symbols of the harvest. And from the vigil of Samhain came goblins, fortune telling, magic, black cats, and evil spirits. Today, Halloween is basically a secular, non religious holiday. It's a time to have fun and make fun of superstitions like witches, ghosts, and goblins. I, according to him, it's no harm, it's no fun, you know. We just dressing up, you know, to each his own. Children dress in costumes such as elves, fairies, ghosts, witches, and other fantastic creatures. All right. It says here, Trick or Treat, a history of Halloween. All right, pretty cool cover. So this was by Lisa Morton, the book, and it says here, Halloween, the misunderstood festival. Misunderstood, huh? In 1762, British military engineer Charles Vallancey was sent to Ireland on a surveying mission. Vallancey, however, was no ordinary engineer. He was extraordinarily well read in history and linguistics, corresponded with many of the leading proponents of the then fashionable Orientalism, and fancied himself a scholar and writer. He soon developed an obsession with the lore and language of Ireland's ancient Celts, and he wrote hundreds of pages of collected fact, observation, and speculation on the Green Isles' early inhabitants. There was just one problem. Much of what Vallancey recorded was wrong. By 1786, when Vallancey published the third volume of his Opus Collectanea de Rebus Hibernicis, it was already well established that the name Samhain, pronounced Samhain, referred to the 3-day Celtic New Year celebration that began when the sun went down on the 31st of October. Other linguists had recorded the translation of summer's end for Samhain, but Vallancey believed this was a false derivation, and went on to state that Samhain was actually a Celtic deity who was also known as Baalsap for Baal. Uh-oh, Lord. So this person is kind of defending the pagan holiday, and it might actually go to Baal. Yeah, that's when so-called Hebrews started worshiping Baal. A lot of them became so-called Druids. It didn't seem to matter much that the name Baalsap appears nowhere else in Celtic lore, or even the Vallancey's work was dismissed during his lifetime. The Orientalist scholar Sir William Jones said of Vallancey, "Do you wish to laugh? Skim the book over? Do you wish to sleep? Read it regularly?" Somehow Vallancey's work found its way onto library shelves all over Britain and formed a strange alternative history of Samhain and its descendant Halloween that ran alongside the traditional Celtic folklore texts and Irish dictionaries that defined the word correctly. Nearly 2 centuries after Vallancey first journeyed into Ireland, books like Halloween through 20 Centuries were still referring to Samhain, Lord of the Dead. By the early 1990s, Christian groups throughout America were urging parents to keep their children from celebrating a holiday during which human beings were burned as an offering in order to appease and cajole Samhain, the Lord of Death. How is it possible that religious and community leaders would use the writings of a romantic who was denounced in 1818 as having written more nonsense than any man of his own time? So basically, what this author is saying is, hey, it's not a being they're sacrificing to him. Samhain is, she's saying, is just a celebration of equinoxes, I guess, but it could be both. I would say it could be both. Halloween is undoubtedly the most misunderstood of festivals. So yeah, like she's saying, some people, hey, to them, it's part of their history too. So they're, of course, going to defend it. Virtually every English speaker in the world can instantly tell you where the name Christmas comes from. They could probably also provide an anecdote about St. Patrick and his day. And of course, those celebrations with simple declarative titles like New Year's or Father's Day require no great linguistic skill. But amazingly, if you understand so much of the origin of the name Halloween, the word itself almost has a strange pagan feel, which is ironic since the name derives from All Hallows Eve. Prior to about AD 1500, the noun hallow derived from the Old English alga, meaning holy, commonly referred to a holy personage or specifically a saint. All Saints' Day was the original name for the Catholic celebration held on November 1st, but long after Hallow had lost its meaning as a noun, the eve of that day would become known as Halloween. Halloween owes part of its legacy of confusion and obfuscation to those same Celts who provided the basis for the celebration with their Samhain. Surprisingly, little is known of them, since they kept no written record. Little is known of them. This is what I'm saying. Our knowledge of Ireland's Celts is based largely on orally transmitted lore, much of which was recorded by Christian monks of the first millennium, and scattered archaeological evidence. It's no wonder that writers like Valenci, the ones with a more exotic take on history, dreamt of a race of savages who offered up human sacrifices to demonic gods and spent the autumn warding off evil spirits by constructing huge Roman bonfires. By the mid 20th century, Halloween historians had added another mistake to their understanding of the day, stating that it was based in part on a Roman festival called Pomona, when in fact there was no such celebration. In the 1960s, a veritable cult of urban legends built up around Halloween, especially the notorious razor blade in the apple myth, which suggested that innocent young children were at risk during the beloved ritual of trick or treat. Although there were no recorded instances of real cases behind these modern myths, over the next few decades there were reports of anonymous psychos poisoning candy, custom killers stalking college dorms on Halloween night, and satanic cults offering up sacrifices of black hats, and warning of gangs initiating new members by committing murders on October 31st. It sometimes seems as though the prank playing and mischievousness that have been a key factor in Halloween celebrations for hundreds of years have crossed over and played tricks on its history. The unassailable facts of Halloween are fourfold. First, it boasts both pagan and Christian history. Second, its position in the calendar at the end of the autumn, beginning of winter means it has always served in part as a harvest celebration. Third, it is related to other festivals of the dead around the world, and so has always had a somber, even morbid element. Finally, however, it is combination of pagan New Year celebration and joyful harvest feasts have also given it a raucous side, and it has almost always been observed with parties and mischief making. Says here Samhain and the Celts. Any examination of Halloween's history and its long line of misunderstandings must start by examining the Celts, an ancient people who themselves are often the subject of mistaken identity. This is what I'm saying. The Celts were referred to as Keltoi by Greek and Roman writers, so-called Greeks, so-called Romans. The Celts, and probably by themselves, and it's likely that the name derives from the Indo-European word for hidden, Kel, making the Celts literally the hidden people. Who is the hidden ones, huh? Psalms 83. They once spread across most of Europe and throughout the British Isles, and they even occupied Rome for several months around 400 BC. What do you mean, Rome? What Rome? Many of the Valency's contemporaries painted a picture of the Celts and their druid priests that made his notion seem serene by comparison, as in this spectacular example from 1793. This degenerated priesthood seemed to have delighted in human blood, and their victims, though sometimes beasts, were oftener men, and not only criminals and captives, but their very disciples were inhumanly sacrificed on their altars, while some transfixed by arrows, others crucified in their temples, some instantly stabbed to the heart, and others impaled in honor of the gods, bespoke amidst variety of death, the most horrid proficiency in the science of murder. However, contrary to the romantic notions of both ancient historians, including Julius Caesar, and later writers, the Celts were far from being warmongering primitives whose druids were bloodthirsty slayers. Modern archaeological evidence, as well as written historical remnants, suggest that the Celts were skilled in mining and working with metals, mining, huh? Who mined all the copper in Michigan. Farming, farming, agriculture started here, road making, legal systems, and medicine. Their religion involved hundreds of deities and barred written records of their rituals and stories. But some histories and various inscriptions made in Greek, Latin, and later Irish have survived and make up most of what we know about their celebrations and festivals. The Celts did engage in human sacrifice, but often chose the victims from within their own tribes by throwing lots in the form of bits of cake. Whoever received the piece with the blackened bottom was offered to the gods to ensure the fertility of the herds, a fruitful harvest or victory in battle. The number three figures prominently in Celtic beliefs. Many of their gods and goddesses were depicted with three heads or aspects, which is possibly one of the reasons why so many later Halloween fortune telling games required a task to be performed three times. They believed in an afterlife, with souls sojourning. journeying into an other world, sometimes called Tir na Samhain, or land of summer. Note the similarity to Samhain. They believe that the doors between this world and the other world open the night a year. Samhain, of course. On that night, the dead might return to the living, and creatures called Sid or fairies could cross over to be devil humans. Samhain features frequently in Celtic lore. In practical terms, it was the end of summer and so the beginning of winter. Crops were gathered and livestock were brought in from the fields. Pigs and cattle were slaughtered, with only a small number kept for breeding stock. A Celtic day began when the sun went down, and so Samhain started with the onset of darkness on the 31st of October, with a, with a feast celebrating the recent harvest and temporary abundance of food. Some archaeological evidence suggests that Samhain may have been the only time when the Celts had ready access to an abundance of alcohol, and their surviving accounts of the festival in which drunkenness always seems to occur support this as well. All right, that's called being merry. Merry, merry, merry. Yeah. Samhain was also an important day for administration, akin to the U.S. tax day in modern times. A yearly gathering was held at Tara, the ancient seat of kings. Remember Tara? Who founded Tara, guys? This is what I'm saying. So these people are meeting at Tara? You mean the people coming out of the line of Sarah, the line of Judah, the Judah's daughters, remember? The line of Sarah. Remember they settled in Tara. You guys remember that video? The ancient seat of kings. Yeah, who's these kings? Remember the scepter will always be with Judah. With 3 days worth of feasting and sporting alternated with debt repayment and trials. Those who were found guilty of particularly severe crimes were executed then as well. Before the eve of Samhain, all home hearth fires were extinguished, and the Druids used need fire, or fire created by friction, to construct a bonfire on the nearby hill of Plaka. Embers from this fire were distributed to each household, and a tax was extracted for this service. But Samhain wasn't just a time of debts, livestock, and feasting. It was also with Beltane, or 1st of May, one of the two most important days in Celtic heroic tales, which almost invariably contain some frightening element. In one early story, the Fomorians, all right, a race of demonic giants, talking about Hamites, who have conquered Ireland after a great battle, demand a yearly tax of two-thirds of the subdued survivors' corn. Corn? Hello, corn? Is it corn from America? Milk and children, to be paid each year on Samhain. The Tuatha De Danann, a race of godlike, okay, the godlike people, the tribe of Dan mixed with Judah, these godlike people, Israelites, right? This is what I'm saying, guys. You got to break down what they're saying, and this is what I'm trying to explain. Yeah, these people fell off. A lot of them, they started doing things they weren't supposed to. But and also when the Romans came, they were being forced to participate in all these festivities and all their harvest, feasts and all this stuff they were doing became pagan rituals to the Romans and their version of with their pagan gods. They mixed their stuff with it. A lot of these so-called Celts were ancient Israelites, Hebrews, Hebrew people. Fomorians appeared to be a Hamite race, very tall. So they were going after the Tuatha Danann, huh? A godlike people, the Tuatha Danann or the tribe of Dan, a race of benevolent ancestors chronicled in Celtic mythology. We already broke this down. This is more than mythology. Check out my series, Israel and the Nations of Europe, and then all my Danite videos. All right, it's more than mythology, and just like Halloween is more than just a holiday, that's what we're trying to break it down. Battle against the Fomorians for years, but it takes the Morrigan, a mother god, and the hero Angus Og to finally drive the monsters from Ireland, on Samhain, of course. Samhain could have a romantic side as well, as attested to by a later story involving Angus and the dream of Angus Og. Angus is visited in his dream every night for a year by a beautiful young girl with whom he falls in love. When she stops appearing to him, Angus begins to waste away until his father, the Celtic god the Dagda, goes to the Cid for help in finding the girl. After 2 years, she is located among 150 other maidens, who all bear silver chains. She is Princess Caed, daughter of King Edal. The king, however, refuses to hand her over to Angus, and so the Dagda and his allies destroy Ethal's palace. It is only then that Ethel reveals the strange truth about his daughter. She has been bewitched, spending 1 year in human form, and the next as a swan, transforming in Samhain. Angus goes to visit her in her swan form, and he changes himself into a swan so they can fly away together. Halloween's sinister aspect is presaged in another traditional Celtic tale, that of the boy hero Finn MacCumhill, who journeys to the yearly Samhain gathering of Tara, presided over by the High King. Alright, who's these High Kings? Come on now. The king soon puts a challenge before the rugged assemblage. Each Samhain, a man of the Cid, Aelin, comes to Tara playing a harp that places all those who hear it under an enchanted sleep. Aelin then issues a wall of flame from his mouth and burns down the palace, huh? Flames from his mouth like a dragon? You mean like a dragon? Aelin has destroyed Tara 9 times, and this year the king offers a reward to anyone who can stop him. Finn undertakes the task, and an ally gives him with an enchanted spear. Finn uses the head of the spear to ward off the magical music and his cloak to turn aside the flame. Aelin tries to flee, but Finn casts the spear just as Aelin is stepping through the entrance to the other world, and the Cid warrior is slain. Finn cuts off Aelin's head and returns it to the king the following morning, at which point he receives his reward. Perhaps the most famous and eeriest Samhain story is the adventure of Nera, in which the eponymous hero is challenged by King Ailill to place a loop around the foot of a hanging corpse on Samhain. Nero succeeds, and the corpse promptly begs him for a drink, claiming to have been thirsty when he was hanged. Nero removes the dead man from the gallows and tries to find a house where he can treat the corpse to a drink. When he does, the corpse spits the drink back at the humans who are present, and they immediately die. Nero returns to the corpse to the gallows and journeys back to Aelil's fort, only to find it engulfed in flames set by a fairy army. He follows the army back through their mound and finds himself in the other world. He takes a fairy wife there who tells him that the fire was a hallucination, but will actually happen unless he can warn Aelil. Returning to our world, Nero finds that no time has passed. A common theme in later Halloween tales is how time passes differently in the fairy realm, and he warns Aelil, who manages to destroy the malevolent Cid before they can attack again. Nero, however, spends the rest of his life in the other world. Although historians have argued over how much Samhain really contributed to the modern celebration of Halloween, it seems likely that the Celtic festival's peculiar mix of harvest, rowdy celebration, and fearful supernatural beliefs gave Halloween much of its character. Just as Celtic culture was recorded by later Christianized Irish scribes, so those same Irish integrated aspects of their so those same Irish integrated aspects of their ancestors Samhain into their own All Saints' Day, an integration that would prove an uncomfortable mix to the very church that initially promoted it. It says here All Saints and All Souls Day. By the 7th century, the Catholic Church, welcome. Hope you guys enjoying. I'm going to keep reading if you guys don't mind. All right. So it says here by the 7th century, the Catholic Church has spread throughout most of Europe. Missionaries, including St. Patrick, who would become the patron saint of Ireland, had successfully converted the pagan Celts. Who's this St. Patrick, huh? Roman Vatican representative. Remember, he got rid of the snakes, supposedly? Who's the snakes? The Amaru people? Who you talking about? Now he's going after the pagan Celts, huh? Who's the Celts again? They're meeting in Tara. A high king meeting in Tara. They're the Celts, huh? The church had found that conversion was far more successful when attempts were made to offer clear alternatives to existing calendar celebrations, rather than simply stamping them out. Pope Gregory I, who would later be canonized, famously wrote in a letter in 601 to an abbot en route to Britain, suggesting that existing temples and even sacrificial rituals should not be destroyed but rather turned to use for Christian purposes. All right, a lot of their churches were actually Celtic, you know, places or buildings. This doctrine, known as syncretism, even replaced lesser pagan gods with Catholic saints. In 609, the church put syncretism into action by converting the Pantheon in Rome to the service of the Virgin Mary and all the martyrs. All right, so this is nothing new, guys. Remember, if you've been following me, when it comes to the Hermetic teachings, of Hermes, um, that became, eventually same kind of people who were following Hermetics were the same people created, Christianity and so on and so on. So when we're talking about all this stuff, adapting the Celtic, yeah, that's what they were doing. That's what they were doing. The famed pagan temple was christened the Santa Maria Rotunda on the 13th May of that year, and the forerunner of All Saints' Day was born. The choice of 13 May was important as well, since it had formerly marked the final night of Lemuria, a Roman festival of the dead. Roman festival of the dead, I told you. Who's really influencing these Celtic people? Like Samhain, Lemuria was celebrated over 3 nights. Just like Samhain, and was a time when the dead returned to the world of the living. However, the ghostly visitors of Lemuria, the lemurs, were terrifying creatures who were ritually expelled from the household at midnight on 13th of May. You guys hear that? The Romans also celebrated the spirits of their ancestors during Parentalia, worshiping the ancestors, Parentalia, in its closing ceremony, Feralia, which took place on the 22nd of February, and which later became the Catholic feast of Saint Peter. All right, Saint Peter. One holiday the Romans did not celebrate, and which has become the source of historical misinformation, was a festival in honor of Pomona, a minor goddess of fruits and orchids. A contemporary of Valencia by the name of William Hutchinson may have started the error when he stated in 1776, this year the first day of November seems to retain the celebration of a festival to Pomona, when it is supposed the summer stores are open on the approach of winter. Hutchinson was probably taking inspiration from poetry. The mythological tale of Pomona and Vertumnus was much in vogue in the 18th century, thanks largely to Alexander Pope's translation of the story from Ovid's Metamorphoses, in which Vertumnus, after being spurned by the lovely Pomona, takes on various forms until he convinces her of his love. Like Valencia, Hutchinson was quoted frequently over the next 2 centuries, and historians began to assume that Halloween really was simply a revamped celebration of Pomona. However, the truth was that Pomona had no festival, and that November was the dullest month in the Roman calendar, with no important holidays or festivals. But the notion that Halloween was somehow partly Roman seemed simply too delicious for most historians to give up. Take, for example, this reference from a book on Halloween dating from 1935. After discussing the vigil of Samhain and incidentally referring to Samhain, the Lord of Death, the author states, "Our Halloweens is almost equally descended from the ancient Roman festival, in honor of Pomona, the goddess of fruit and gardens, who was honored about the 1st of November." Amusingly, the next paragraph offers a compounding of errors when it suggests that Halloween has been fused into a single magic celebration, sacred both to Samhain and Pomona. Samhain's existence, however, is unquestionable, and sometime in the mid-8th century, Pope Gregory III moved the Feast of the Martyrs to November 1st, the date of Samhain, and indicated that it was henceforth to be a celebration of all the saints. 100 years later, Gregory IV ordered universal observance of the day. Was the date moved to November 1st so that the harvest could be used to feed the hordes of pilgrims flocking to Rome for the same celebration, as some historians have suggested, or was it relocated in the calendar in an attempt to co-opt Samhain, which the Christianized Celts were slow to give up? Christianized Celts, huh? Hellenized, Romanized. A famed 9th century Irish religious calendar, the Martyrology of Oengus, the Kuldi, or Chaldi, offers intriguing clues. Later, English translations of the entry for the 1st of November gives the day as stormy All Saints' Day, but the original Irish text plainly shows Samhain. The Church provided another argument in favor of the 1st of November date being chosen as a deliberate Samhain replacement. When around AD 1000 it added the celebration of All Souls' Day on November 2nd, legend has it that All Souls' Day was inaugurated in 998 by Odilon, Bishop of Cluny, after he heard of an island where a cave mouth emitted the agonized sounds of souls in torment. You guys hear that? The official explanation given for the new festival was that it would offer the living a chance to pray for the souls of the deceased, especially those in purgatory. However, it seems more likely that the gloomy, ghostly new celebration was added to cement the transformation of Samhain from pagan to Christian holiday. By the 14th century, All Souls' Day was observed throughout the Western Church and had been added to all official books and calendars. It's no coincidence, then, that the first recorded celebrations of Halloween began to appear about this time. The festival of 1511 says, "We read in old time good people would, on all Halloween, they bake bread and deal it for Christian souls," suggesting that practice of making special foods for Halloween was already long established. A festival from 1493 noted, "Good friends, such a day ye shall have all Halloween day." By the 16th century, there are numerous accounts in parish records of full contention of the ring gears on All Hallow Night, meaning that Halloween was sounded out with the raucous ringing of bells. Henry VIII tried to abolish ringing of bells all the night long upon All Hallow Day at night, as did his daughter Elizabeth. But many parishes were so reluctant to give up the practice that their bell ringers were repeatedly fined. In some areas, Halloween marked the beginning of the Christmas season, and thus was the time to choose a lord of misrule, typically a servant man in a lord's household, to oversee the merriment. One account from 1598 notes, "These lords, beginning their rule at Hallow Eve, continued the same till the morrow after the feast of the Purification, commonly called Candlemas Day, in which space there were fine and subtle disguising masks and mummeries." The use of lords of misrule was officially banned in Scotland, where they were called abbots of unreason, in 1555, and fell out of favor throughout most of England. In the 1600s, partly because religious reformers considered the practice to stem from the Roman Saturnalia, also a December festival. And by 1550, Samhain had been completely absorbed into the dual festival of All Saints and All Souls, and yet the Christian celebrations retained much of the pagan character, still offering both joyful celebration and somber contemplation of death. But there were other events happening in Europe that had become just as central to the evolution and future of Halloween. Huh? The future of Halloween. Some pretty interesting images here and a screenshot of an old book here, right? Look what they're doing in the image. Burning of a witch, supposedly, huh? In 1346, the Black Death began to rampage throughout the Western Hemisphere. Although it would reappear at intervals for the next 400 years, it peaked in about 1350, killing as much as 60% of Europe's population. It not only left Europe reeling from the loss of human life, but also changed popular culture. introducing a new obsession with images of death into the arts. The plague, the primitive press were both spreading, and soon images of the danse macabre featuring gruesome skeletal figures became widely available to the surviving population. The new common obsession with depictions of skeletal grim reapers found a natural home in a festival once thought to be the night when the dead crossed over into the world of the living. Following in the footsteps of the Black Death was another kind of epidemic, witch hunts. Beginning about 1480, tens of thousands of people, mostly women, were imprisoned, beheaded, hanged, or burned alive at the stake as witches. They were sometimes accused of having killed by creating or spreading plague, and thanks to such works as the Malus Maleficarum, which became the manual for witch hunters, they were commonly associated with the devil, even to the point of accusations of sexual relations. One entire section of the Malus is concerning witches who copulate with the devil. The witch trials allowed both feudal lords and the church to prosper by seizing the property of those charged, and solidified the image of the witch as a malicious hag with broom, cauldron, and cat, three symbols of feminine housekeeping. In some trials, the victims were accused of having participated in gatherings and Sabbaths held on All Hallows, Sabbaths? The choice of All Hallows as a major holiday for witches and devils was no doubt coerced from the accused with a political agenda in mind. After Henry VIII ascended the throne in 1509, he sought to separate the Church of England from the Vatican, a struggle that continued with Henry's daughter, Elizabeth I. Both Henry and Elizabeth viewed All Saints' Day as a papal holiday, and both issued proclamations intended to subdue celebration of it. After Henry's ban on bell ringing, Elizabeth extended the law to include the superstitious ringing of bells on All Hallow Tide and All Souls Day with the two nights before and after. A spectacular witch trial took place during the reign of the Protestant King James I. In 1590, dozens of Scots were accused of having attempted to prevent James from reaching his queen to be Anne of Denmark by gathering on Halloween night and then riding the sea in sieves while creating storms by tossing live cats tied to human body parts into the water. After the infamous North Berwick witch trials, as they were called, Halloween was forever to be firmly associated with witches, cats, cauldrons, brooms, and the devil. The latter figure could certainly be called Halloween's most controversial icon, the devil. That fallen angel who is the antagonist of Christianity appears frequently in reference to Halloween and under a variety of names, including Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub, Mephistopheles from Faust, and Old Scratch. Some historians have suggested that the devil may have originated as a way to transform pagan horn gods, including the Greek Pan and the Celt Cernunnos, into a symbol of evil. The devil first appears in relation to Halloween as the god, consort, and leader of witches. For example, in 1597, a Scot named Thomas Leyes, who was eventually burned as a witch, was accused of having come upon Halloween about midnight, accompanied by his mother, since burnt, and many other sorcerers and witches to the market and fish cross at Aberdeen, under the conduct and guidance of the devil, present with them all in company, playing before them on his kind of instruments, when they all danced about both the said crosses and the mill market a long pace of time. There are numerous other accounts of witches dancing with the devil on Halloween night, and Scottish boys were supposed to notice that their cats were tired on the day after Halloween from carrying witches to the feast with the devil. Many fortune-telling charms were performed in the name of the devil, and in the Aberdeenshire boys would flee a dying Halloween bonfire, while exclaiming, "The devil take the hindmost." By the arrival of the 20th century, the devil had been reduced to little more than a humorous imp, usually portrayed in a red costume with horns and a tail, either appearing as a quaint paper decoration or assisting a witch on a colorful postcard. Halloween parties even featured the devil in foods, devil foods cake and deviled eggs made frequent appearances on October menus, and later in the century, when costumes were mass produced, devils were perpetual bestsellers. Let's see what it says here. In 1845, a disease known as potato blight began to ravage the staple food crop of Ireland. Over the next 7 years, approximately 1 million Irish would die, and another million left the country, many sailing to America. Scottish immigration to the United States was also high, with nearly half a million Scots settling in the New World during the latter half of the 19th century, 1800s. All these impoverished newcomers were crossing the Atlantic. Changes were also occurring in the middle and upper classes on both sides of the ocean. Victoria ascended the throne in June 1837, and during her 65-year reign, Britain experienced prosperity, peace for the most part, and significant advances in technology and medicine. In America, the influx of Scotch-Irish immigrants coincided with the rise of the middle class, who were anxious to imitate their British cousins. Victoria herself spent Halloween in 1869 at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, and her experience there was widely reported. As the shades of evening were closing in, numbers of torchlights were observed approaching the castle. Dancing was commenced by the torchbearers dancing a huachan in fine style to the lilting strains of Mr. Ross, the Queen's piper. After dancing for some time, the torch-bearers proceeded round the castle in martial order, and as they were proceeding down the granite staircase at the northwest corner of the castle, the procession presented a singularly beautiful and romantic appearance. Having made the circuit of the castle, the remainder of the torches were thrown in a pile at the southwest corner, thus forming a large bonfire, which was speedily augmented with other combustibles until it formed a burning mass of huge proportions, round which dancing was spiritedly carried on. Her Majesty witnessed the proceedings with apparent interest for some time. So dancing around like a bonfire, right? It's probably no coincidence that the first mention of American Halloween celebrations began to appear shortly after this account, and were invariably linked to the growing middle class, albeit as child's entertainment. A short story printed in a popular ladies' magazine of 1870 painted Halloween as an English holiday celebrated by children and describes a transplanted family's party and death. As the children arrive, they must enter the house by stepping over a broom, placed there to keep witches out. The children tell fortunes by burning nuts, pouring hot lead into water, and reading the shapes formed therein, laying out cards, and choosing among the lucky bowls, which have now been replaced by a basin of water, a pan of ashes, and the wing of a goose, the last indicating marriage to an old man. The youthful revealers also play Snapdragon, a game in which children try to snatch bits of dried fruit or wrapped portions from a dish of flaming alcohol. Pull taffy and make fake cakes, small cakes made in silence and then placed under the pillow to invoke dreams. Finally, the story's heroine, a young lady in love named Nell, walks backward down the stairs only to be surprised by a kiss from her beau. The story limns Halloween as both charming and vaguely exotic, and after appearing in the popular Godey's Ladies book and magazine, it undoubtedly led to many copycat parties among its readers. Alright, you guys hear this? Some of the fortune telling rituals that crossed the Atlantic remained popular in the New World long enough to take on a distinctly American flavor. Lucky balls, for instance, are recorded at American parties as late as the Second World War, when they no longer held simply clean and dirty water, but were filled with red, white, and blue colored water and named for different branches of the armed services. Thus, a girl might discover the military affiliation of her future beloved. Colin, not burning, and apple paring all found a new home in America, usually with slight variations. Immigrants brought other traditions with them as well, including some that were dying out in the Old World. This is the Old World. Bonfires, for instance, were held in America, albeit on a reduced scale. A Good Housekeeping article in 1908 described a Halloween party in which boys were costumed as ghosts and placed around a bonfire, and one boy dressed as the devil pretended to grab them and throw them into the flames. It's easy to see why this did not become a regular Halloween tradition. Some customs were literally reversed on crossing the Atlantic. In American versions of Halloween, cabbage pulling, the fortune seeker, right? Cabbage pulling, Cabbage Patch Kids, might be required to venture into the cabbage field backward. A more ghoulish American version demanded that the seeker pass through a graveyard on the way to the field. Cabbages also remain popular in pranking and in parts of Canada and the US. The night before Halloween, which became the prime night for mischief, was known as Cabbage Night, huh? Cabbage Stump Night, the latter based on the practice of hurling cabbage stalks. Apples found favors in America as well. Apple juice became a standard item at Halloween celebrations, often served with donuts, popcorn, and pumpkin pie. In America, the word corn came to refer to maize. Maize was always corn, which is harvested in late autumn. Corn husking contests were sometimes a feature of early American Halloween parties, and to this day, American Halloween decorations often include decorative ears of corn, known as Indian corn or corn stalks, something they incorporated from us. Another common American Halloween icon also derived from the harvest, the scarecrow. Scarecrows, which are traditionally figures made of old clothing and straw, serve an important function throughout the growing year, driving birds away from crops. But by late October, once the harvest has been completed, their usefulness is over, despite Feathertop, Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic tale of 1552 featuring a witch who brings a scarecrow to life. There's little evidence that scarecrows figured prominently in Halloween, all right, uh, celebrations prior to 1900. It's likely that the scarecrow largely became a Halloween icon thanks to the efforts of early 20th century Frankenboys, who frequently employed the figures in their nighttime scares, often after replacing the head with a glowing jack-o'-lantern. Indeed, many of the early postcards that depict scarecrows either show them in the service of a mischievous young lad who is usually holding it up behind a window to scare a girl, or show the would-be prankster being inadvertently frightened by his own creation. Scarecrows went on to become popular Halloween decorations, and folklorist Jack Santino has noted that although sometimes referred to as harvest figures, they are almost always combined with Halloween imagery. Witches, ghosts, skeletons, jack-o'-lanterns, and yard decoration, creating what he calls a folk assemblage. They have also served as the basis of Halloween costumes and are popular scares in modern haunted attractions. Towards the end of the 19th century, Halloween in America was in the process of acquiring what would become its most popular icon, the jack-o'-lantern carved from a pumpkin. The legend of Jack, the blacksmith, all right, the blacksmith, who were the blacksmiths? Mostly Sephardic Jews, a lot of them were the blacksmiths who outwits the devil, appears in hundreds of variants throughout both Europe and America, and typically ends when Jack dies and being denied entrance to either heaven or hell. Instead, wanders the earth with his way lit only by an ember held in a carved out turnip. In Britain, children had carved Halloween lanterns from large turnips or sweets, and in Scotland there are contemporary reports of masked youngsters carrying carved lit turnips called neat lanterns. At the village of Hinton, St. George in Somerset, a strange Halloween-like festival called Punky Night falls on the fourth Thursday of October and involves children carving intricate designs into the skin of the mangel wurzel, a large beetroot-like vegetable normally grown as cattle feed. The children parade through the village streets singing this song. It's punky night tonight. It's punky night tonight. Give us a candle. Give us a light. If you don't, you'll get a fright. It's punky night tonight. It's punky night tonight. Adam and Eve would believe it's punky night tonight. In America, pumpkins, a large bright orange squash native to the New World and harvested in late autumn, all right, native to Americas, had been carved into grinning faces for decades prior to the arrival of Halloween. In 1820, Washington Irving immortalized the carved pumpkin in his story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and although the piece would later become a Halloween classic thanks to its combination of humor and fright, it made no direct mention of the day. In his poem, The Pumpkin of 1580, John Greenleaf Whittier links the pumpkin to another festival, Thanksgiving, but goes on to recall carving wild, ugly faces and pumpkins lit from within by candles and telling fairy stories by their light. Jack-o'-lanterns aren't mentioned in most of the Halloween party descriptions from the 1860s and 70s, and 1880 articles suggest that they aren't even as useful as cabbages at Halloween. Cabbage? Come on now. Cabbage Patch Kids. But within a few years, the legends of Jack the Blacksmith, Washington Irving's Ichabod Crane, turnip carving from the Old World, and the American tradition of cutting faces into the giant fruit would combine to create the jack-o'-lantern. In 1898, Martha Russell Orney, in her seminal pamphlet, Halloween, How to Celebrate It, suggests that a Halloween party should be grotesquely decorated with jack-o'-lanterns made of apples, cucumbers, squashes, pumpkins, etc. She also suggests creating bogies or boogies from pumpkins. A pumpkin is carefully hollowed out until nothing but the shell of the rind remains. One side of it is punctured with holes for the mouth, eyes, and nose, and made as nearly as possible to resemble a human face. A lighted candle is then fastened within the eyebrows, are put on with burnt cork, right? And a demon-like expression given to the features, huh? Demon-like. The boogie or bogey is put in dark room where the young people may stray on its unawares. Orney's playful instructions seem to catch on, not always to the satisfaction of teachers, who by 1906 were complaining why should these carved faces always be made so ugly. By the time of games for Halloween, 1912, jack-o'-lanterns specifically carved from pumpkins were recommended for party decorations. Table decorations, lighting effects, and games, jack-o'-lanterns of pasteboard should be made just large enough to fit over the gas jet in this time prior to the widespread introduction of electricity. It wasn't until Halloween had become established in America that it acquired most of its token animals. Only the cat had been present in Halloween lore previously, and usually in association with the witch. The Scots, for example, thought witches might turn cats into horses to ride on Halloween night, while in America one folk belief had it that a witch who boiled a live black cat on Halloween night and then washed the bones in a spring would receive a visit from the devil, who would reveal to her the lucky bone that would henceforth serve as her talisman. Edgar Allan Poe's famed short tale, The Black Cat, is now a Halloween classic, even though it makes no reference to the day itself, and cats figure prominently in 20th century Halloween folk art. Cats have recently been a source of concern at Halloween. In the USA, black cats are believed to be stolen for use in occult rituals, and many animal protection agencies warn pet owners to keep close tabs on their black cats during the Halloween season. You guys hear that? Hey, don't let your black cats go on Halloween. The tie between bats and owls in Halloween is less clear. Both animals feature predominantly in 20th century images of the festival, but neither has any real association with it prior to that, nor are they much mentioned in Celtic lore. It may be simply that both are nocturnal predators, which could explain why spiders, for example, are rarely featured in Halloween motifs. Bats may also owe part of their enduring popularity to Bram Stoker's Dracula, since Stoker created the myth of the vampire's ability to transform into a bat. It's also impossible that the manufacturers of postcards and decorations who added the bat, the owl, to Halloween iconography realized that many people generally found spiders and snakes too frightening to purchase in any form. The only other animal featured prominently in 19th century and earlier Halloween lore appeared virtually not at all from 1900 on, the horse. Horses, as the primary mode of transportation prior to the automobile, might carry witches, fairies, or goblins on Halloween night. The Celts recorded horse races as part of their Samhain festivities. All right, horse race and cavalcades were once a popular way to celebrate All Saints' Day. The puka might transform into a horse, as in the story Magna Me Kom Harley, about a puka who takes that form and emerges from a hillside each Halloween, describing the events of the coming year to those who encounter it. Witches would use an enchanted bridle on Halloween to transform young men into steeds so they could engage in Hallowmas raids. Scottish witch revels held on Halloween. In Britain, the ghostly Wild Hunt, led by the Spectre Huntsman, was thought to be especially powerful on Halloween night and was said to include 20 black horses and 20 black hounds. Halloween's now established colors of black and orange were also settled around this time. A few early 20th century Halloween decorating articles and guides suggest other color schemes. For example, an article of 1912 on preparing a Halloween window decoration states that the day's colors are brown, yellow, and white. However, an article from just 6 years later affirms absolutely that the colors of Halloween are orange and black. The earlier colors had emphasized harvest, but now the jack-o'-lantern, night, and death had come to dominate Halloween's color palette. As Halloween acquired emblems and a playful image, there was one area of the USA where Halloween was still celebrated as the more solemn All Saints' Day. The French who had come to New Orleans and other parts of Louisiana brought their La Toussaint customs with them, and All Saints' Day was one of the most important days of the year in the 19th century calendar. New Orleans tourist guidebooks of the period always remark on the city's unique above ground cemeteries, necessary because of the moist soil and the November 1st celebrations that were considered one of the year's two great festivals, the other being Mardi Gras. Families visited the graves of departed loved ones and cleaned and decorated the monuments. Vendors lined up outside graveyards, offering flowers and food. By the end of the 20th century, the New Orleans observance of All Saints had considerably lessened, but nearby communities such as Lacombe and Lafitte were still vigorously celebrating with a nighttime vigil often conducted mainly by those of Creole descent. Louisiana remains the only state in America in which All Saints' Day is legal holiday. All right, so in Spanish countries, it's like a big thing as well. By the beginning of the 1900s, American Halloween celebrations were starting to transform again. This time, they reinstated more of the pranking of Irish celebrations. In rural areas, especially 31st of October soon became an evening that was almost exclusively celebrated by mischievous young boys. A turn of the century guide on boys' crafts suggests this is the only evening on which a boy can feel free to play pranks outdoors without danger of being pinched, and it is his delight to scare passing pedestrians, ring doorbells, and carry off the neighbors' gates after seeing that his own is unhinged and safely placed in the barn, even if he is suspected, and the next day made to remove the rubbish barricading the doors, lug back the stone carriage steps, and climb a tree for the front gate. The punishment is nothing compared with the sports the pranks have furnished him. Right? So, uh, how many of you haven't done that on Halloween? Hey, I gotta admit, I kind of did that a couple times when I was little. Bring a couple doorbells, a couple pumpkins, threw a couple eggs here and there. Nothing big, nothing big. Apologies to everybody, I did that too. The same book goes on to describe methods for constructing bean blowers, aka pea shooters, goblin figures, and several varieties of the notorious tic tac, an immensely popular Halloween noisemaker. This toy, which consisted of a notched wooden spool on a stick, would be run over windows to create a startling loud rattle. And for almost half a century, the tic tac was practically synonymous with Halloween. Right? Halloween. I know children's not like that. But kids will be kids. Not, don't assume your kids are perfect. No, nobody's perfect, even adults. And yeah, we're not endorsing it. We're not telling kids to go do that. So kids, don't go do that. Not everyone saw Halloween mischief as simply the fun-loving but ultimately harmless sports of young boys. As pranking became more widespread, it became more of a problem. Simply disassembling a gate. In fact, the name Gate Night replaced Halloween in many areas. Was one thing, but disassembling the gate and then moving it into the center of town where it might be piled in the middle of Main Street with dozens of other gates was more troublesome. In the 1920s, Halloween pranking spread into the rapidly expanding major urban areas and became out and out vandalism. Although the simple pranks of the past, switching shop signs or flinging a sock filled with flour at a man's black coat, were still practiced. So were far more destructive activities, including breaking windows, tripping pedestrians, and setting fires. In 1933, during the height of America's Great Depression, destructive Halloween prank playing was so virulent that many cities dubbed the year's celebration Black Halloween. Vandalism was now described as the work of hoodlums rather than mischievous boys, and included sawing down telephone posts, overturning automobiles, opening fire hydrants to flood city streets, and openly taunting the police. Local governments that were already struggling economically were overwhelmed, and many considered banning Halloween altogether. I hope you guys enjoyed today's little 101 crash course on the history of Halloween here, what you can find, mostly what they tell us, you know. Of course, it's probably deeper. And yes, you got to admit, there's a lot of pagan stuff to this, you know, a lot of pagan stuff to this. You know, they make it into a holiday, you know, people celebrate it and all that. But, you know, it is pretty pagan. You know, the whole thing about celebrating your ancestors who are dead and then you know worshiping demons and calling on and summoning demons and all that, that's a whole different thing, you know, in my opinion. All right, so you know I stay away from stuff like that, you know. You know, I just you breathe easy. Wow, and you know I just try to keep the code, keep the code and not get tempted, you know. Can't fall off, because every time we fall off, that's when we, you know, are allowed to be oppressed. And you know, so I'm just saying, you know, when we're gonna start keeping the code for real. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for tuning in again. Thanks for hearing me read. Appreciate everybody that tuned in. I appreciate uh, all the support, always, all the support, and everybody who appreciates what I do. All right. So, the origins of Halloween, huh? Pura vida, mi gente. Much love and respect. Wow.